Recall the specific, burning embarrassment of a middle school mistake, maybe calling a teacher mom or tripping in the cafeteria. Decades later, the heat of that moment is still instantly accessible. Now, try to recall the steps for balancing a chemical equation or the quadratic formula you studied for weeks that same year. For most of us, those details have vanished. We assume our brains operate like this mechanical drive, etching data onto a platter and storing objective files for later retrieval. But when the 2016 Signs.com study asked people to draw the Starbucks logo, an image they see almost daily, the results were a mess of vague shapes and wrong colors. This mechanical metaphor fails because the recording never happened. Our brains aren't dropping files. They were never built to capture objective data in the first place. This gap between what happened and what we remember can be devastating. In 1980, Steve Titus was convicted of a crime he didn't commit because a victim's memory confidently but incorrectly identified him in a photo lineup. The case became a centerpiece for psychologist Elizabeth Loftus, whose research proved that human memory is not a recording but a reconstruction. In her experiments, witnesses watched a car crash and then answered questions. If she used the word contacted, speed estimates were low, but when she used the word smashed, the witnesses' estimates hit a peak, even though they watched the exact same video. The word smashed did more than change a number. It convinced participants they had seen broken glass at the scene, glass that never actually existed. Human memory functions as an active fabrication engine. It doesn't just forget, it builds new, false details to satisfy the way a question is framed. The affective context model offers a different explanation. The brain never stores the event itself. Instead, it only records your emotional reaction to that event. Imagine a storage container that works differently than a simple box. When an experience happens, think of it as a heavy stamp. It presses into the clay lining of your mind, leaving a deep, specific imprint of how that moment felt. The physical stamp is discarded. You don't keep the object. You only keep the shape of the hole it left in the clay. When you try to remember, your brain looks at that emotional mold and attempts to cast a brand new object that fits the space. Our memories and thoughts are temporary structures, assembled on the spot out of these stored emotional imprints. If everything is just a feeling, what about logic? What about the rational, objective decisions we make in business or science? This friction comes from René Descartes. In the 1600s, he helped cement the idea that a rational soul sits apart from our flawed animal emotions. Modern neuroscience shows no such divide. There is no logic center that operates in a vacuum. What we call thinking is actually the interplay of complex, intertwined feelings. We can see this biological reality in action during the Iowa gambling task. Players pull cards from 4 different decks to win money. They don't know that 2 are bad decks, mathematically designed to lead to heavy losses over time. Most players need 40 turns to consciously realize the math is rigged, but their skin conductivity shows a physical spike in anxiety when their hand hovers over the bad decks after only 10 turns. Long before we can articulate a rational reason, our bodies have already processed the world through feeling. If feeling is the language of the brain, why are our classrooms built on the opposite? Why is our schooling focused on dry, rote memorization? We can trace this back to the 1885 experiments of Hermann Ebbinghaus. To study pure memory, Ebbinghaus stripped away all meaning. He forced people to memorize thousands of nonsense syllables, random letter strings with no emotional significance. He found that these syllables were forgotten almost instantly. He believed he was measuring the natural decay of human memory, but he was actually just observing the brain's refusal to store irrelevant garbage. Because Ebbinghaus showed that repetition could force the brain to retain nonsense for a short time, his work provided the scientific justification for the modern curriculum. We built schools on the idea that repeating a boring fact enough times bypasses the need for the student to actually care about it. This created a culture of force-feeding. We try to hammer data into human heads through sheer, endless repetition, ignoring the biological reality that the brain only keeps what it reacts to. We are storytelling animals. Our ancestors didn't survive by memorizing lists. They survived by sharing intense feelings about what mattered. For any teacher or manager, This means you cannot transfer data from your mind to theirs. Effective instruction requires finding what the other person already cares about, their specific concerns, and mapping the new information to that emotional foundation. If learning isn't attached to a concern or a story, it simply bounces off. If you don't feel it, you don't learn it.